Hi, everyone. Welcome to Forbes Talks. I'm Diane Brady. I am here with Stuart Anderson, one of our contributors who's also executive director of the National Foundation for American Policy. Stuart, hi. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So you have written extensively this month, and I encourage everybody to go look at your pieces on H-1B and some of the changes that are happening with this particular visa and immigration. Let's start with, why is this visa so important?
Well, in a practical sense, it's really the only way an American employer can hire a high-skilled foreign national, particularly an international student, off a U.S. university campus. And when you go to a U.S. university campus, you'll find that only about 25% of the full-time graduate students in some of the key technical fields are actually U.S. students. So when companies, look to fill these specialties, and they aren't just tech companies, almost every company nowadays has a tech component. They're going to need to look at hiring people who weren't born in the United States.
So I think one of the things that I'm curious about is what's changed. Because as a Canadian, I came here, and basically the H-1B visa was so coveted, and it felt like the quota would fill up in a day. Is that still the case?
That's a great point. Things have gotten progressively more difficult for employers and for people like international students who want to stay here. There is a registration system in place where companies register, and then there's essentially a lottery. And in the most recent fiscal year, you had about almost 500,000 registrations sent in, and those are for only about 85,000, the only 85,000 slots for employers. And so you're looking at over 400,000 were rejected before they even saw an adjudicator at U.S. immigration, at the U.S. Immigration Service. So you're looking at an 80% uh, denial rate, essentially, or rejection rate, really, is the more correct term. And on top of that, of course, employers have to pay the same salary as they would to a U.S. worker. And also on top of that, they have thousands of dollars in legal and government fees that they actually wouldn't even have to pay if they were able to hire a U.S. worker.
So that 85,000 has been fairly consistent, correct? Because that's in essence an act of Congress that sets that cap. What has changed, even from the Trump administration to the Biden administration?
Well, it's a good point that Congress hasn't really changed the law. I mean, you're looking, the 65,000 was put into the law in 1990, along with 140,000 green cards, and there's been added a 20,000 exemption for people with a graduate degree from a U.S. University. But if you look at what's happened since 1990, you have basically the World Wide Web, you have cell phones, you have e-commerce, social media, and all these things have created a tremendous demand for technical labor. Yet Congress has not kept up with this, and we've basically had the same supply of labor for people outside the country. Now, when during the Trump administration, you saw a very negative viewpoint towards immigration in general, and particularly as well for high skilled foreign nationals, such that the denial rate for H-1Bs that got through to adjudicators at one point reached 24%, which, from a rate of maybe 4 or 5 or 6% before that.
Can I pause there a second? What does that, does in practice, does that mean that those 85,000 slots that got through, there were even fewer that ended up with jobs?
Well, it was never really 100% clear to employers whether all those were backfilled. I think that the intention maybe was that they were supposed to be, but what ended up happening was that a group of small tech employers, actually immigrant entrepreneurs themselves, hired a law firm, John Watson and Brad Bonias, and they sued and they won. And they were a judge ruled that almost all the key policies on H-1B from the Trump administration were unlawful, and there was a legal settlement. and the denial rate then dropped down to about the current 4%, and in some cases it's even lower. And that's what we've seen during the Biden administration. They basically have continued. So at the end of the Trump administration into the Biden administration, the denial rates have stayed low. But on the other hand, the Biden administration has been much more positive on business immigration and have put some things in place to make things better for employers. But overall, I think employers have mostly been relieved not to be in a constant war with the federal government on high skill immigration.
So I'm looking at one of your stories here, business immigration fees to soar under this new proposed rule. Tell us more about that.
Well, the fees would go up quite a bit for H-1Bs. You look, those registrations we talked about would go from about $10 to $215 for each registration. Collectively, that would be about an additional $100 million a year that employers overall would pay. You'd see the H-1B fee for the petition would not quite double, but would go up significantly. There would also be a $600 asylum fee added on for employers for the H-1B, and then when they sponsored them for green cards and also H-1B extensions. So it could would get increasingly expensive. Again, that's if this goes through. I think there would probably again be lawsuits filed, particularly questioning maybe the $600 fee, since it has nothing to do with recovering services from employers, but would be used for a different purpose.
So what else, when we look into 2023, what other changes are you seeing on the horizon that you think people should be aware of, both as individuals and also as employers?
Well, I think you're going to continue to see increased battles for talent and where to locate that talent. I think because the United States has made it so difficult, you've seen other countries kind of scoop in to have more attractive policies. Canada, which you mentioned earlier, you have some amazing statistics that we could cite about Canada, that you've seen the number of international students from India has well more than doubled since 2016 on an annual basis, going to Canada. And as a result, you've seen the number of immigrants, the permanent residents registered each year in Canada from India has more than doubled. And at the same time, you've seen the number of Indians, graduate students in computer science, in electrical engineering actually drop about 40% in the United States. So it's clearly a reaction to the difficulty in gaining H-1Bs and then permanent residence in the United States, and the relative ease of doing the equivalent in Canada.
It's been so politicized, Stuart, that it's good to remind people sort of what the gains are here and why the H-1B has been such a powerful driver of economic growth. You mentioned India. Silicon Valley, you look at the number of Indian-born CEOs in this company, Indian-born entrepreneurs. Any sense as to what the cost has been to the economy of not getting this right?
Well, I think there's been research by Giovanni Perry that's shown that in areas that don't have as many immigrants, including they didn't get as many H-1Bs, you saw less growth in tech jobs. Madeline Zavodny, an economist, it has a paper coming out for us shortly showing that metro areas with more immigrants, including high-skill immigrants, have much better employment growth overall, including for U.S. workers, and form many more companies. Research that we released this past summer, we looked at billion-dollar companies, unicorn companies. These are companies valued at $1 billion, but they haven't yet reached the stock market, and found that 55% of those companies had at least one immigrant founder, and the number goes up to 2/3 when you look at the children of immigrants. One of those was Gleb Yushin, who is from Russia, and he decided he wasn't going to be able to make a scientific career in Russia with the way things were after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So he decided to study in America. He now has over 200 patents. He's a professor at Georgia Tech, and he co-founded Scylla Nanotechnologies. And what they're doing is basically revolutionary and have a revolutionary technology for energy storage for electric vehicles. And they're able to do that and employ hundreds of Americans. And it's clear to him and to others that that's something he would not have been able to do in Russia. So what we find is not only are we getting these benefits to America, but we're also allowing many individuals to really achieve their potential and achieve their own American dream.
Let me get tactical very quickly, which is if I'm facing this, let's say as an employer, what can I do in light of the restrictions? I know the wind that's in my face. Is there anything I can do tactically to be more likely to succeed in hiring and taking advantage in a good way of this system?
Well, look, all employers are trying to do the best they can to hire U.S. workers when they're available, and then they're able. But when they when they're looking to recruit, they want the best people overall, and so that's usually a combination of U.S. workers and foreign nationals. They're going to recruit on campuses. When you recruit on campuses, if the person's foreign national, you can often have them work first on optional practical training. If it's in a STEM field, that could be for up to 36 months, and the person can have multiple attempts at an H-1B visa. So that would increase the odds that they would be able to stay. But you'd be amazed today, and I don't think our policymakers really appreciate this, at how many even smaller and medium-sized companies have facilities in other countries that they can access and that they get work done, and they would get more work done when the U.S. doesn't make it possible for them to have people work here. And I think you're going to see that, unfortunately, if we don't change the laws with the semiconductor industry. I think we want to build more facilities in the United States. I think that's a generally agreed consensus. But if you listen to the semiconductor companies, they'll tell you that they need people, and they need not only U.S. workers, but they're going to need foreign nationals as well from graduate schools. And because if you want to make things in the United States, you're going to need people too.
It's always good to be a magnet for talent. Thanks for joining us, Stuart.
Thank you.